Usually when we talk about a military ambush,
Right.
there's this expectation of sudden chaotic violence,
Right.
like erupting out of nowhere. The classic narrative is basically a lightning strike.
Yeah.
One minute you're just marching through a quiet landscape, and the next minute the world is exploding, and absolutely nobody saw it coming. The psychological shock is, well, it's the primary weapon.
And that element of complete surprise is, it's the fundamental goal of any ambush doctrine. You want to paralyze the enemy's decision-making loop before they even realize they're in a fight.
Right.
It's what militaries drill for, relentlessly, yet it remains fundamentally terrifying when it actually happens to you.
But what happens when you know it's coming?
Well, that's the thing.
Or, to make it even more surreal, what happens when you literally negotiate with the commanders who are about to spring the trap on you? Like, you watch your soldiers exchange cigarettes with their frontline troops and then knowingly step straight into a pre-registered kill zone.
Yeah, you end up with one of the most phenomenal contradictions in military history.
Right.
You have geopolitical bureaucracy, treaties, and diplomatic stalling, crashing headfirst into raw, brutal, tactical survival.
We're stepping onto a forgotten battlefield today for you, a battle that ignited a massive war between empires. We are traveling to northern Tonkin, which is in modern-day Vietnam, in June of 1884. Specifically, we're analyzing the clash at Bắc Lệ.
And just to jump in real quick,
Yeah, go ahead.
just to plant this in your mind right away,
Yeah.
you pronounce that Bắc Lệ.
Bắc Lệ, right. So we're diving into a situation where a commander's assumption of peace collided with the reality of an enemy who was very much prepared for war.
This engagement is critical to study because it completely shatters our modern assumptions about how colonial campaigns were actually conducted.
How so?
Well, we tend to picture these massive European armies just, steamrolling through undefended territory. Bắc Lệ proves the exact opposite, and it demonstrates how microscopic details in the terrain absolutely dictate the destiny of the men on the ground.
And the only reason we can reconstruct that destiny so vividly is because of a groundbreaking, incredibly meticulous study sourced directly from battlefieldtravels.com.
Absolutely.
This analysis was conducted by Michael Prichter, who didn't just, read old books. He physically explored the site firsthand in April 2025.
Which is huge.
Yeah, this is, without a doubt, the most detailed modern analysis of this clash available anywhere. It merges eyewitness accounts, primary source documents, modern GIS analysis, and cutting-edge topographical mapping.
To understand how revolutionary this approach is, though, we really have to look at the holy grail for this deep dive.
The primary document.
Right. The document that makes all of this modern spatial analysis possible is an 1890 report written by Capitaine Jean-François Alphonse Lecomte. It's titled Le Guet-apens de Bắc Lệ, which translates to the Bắc Lệ ambush.
Let's talk about Lecomte for a second, because he isn't just some infantry officer writing a memoir decades later. He was the reconnaissance officer for the French column.
More than that, he belonged to the French Army Topographical Service. His literal job, the whole reason he was on that expedition, was to draw the maps of this uncharted route as they marched.
Wow.
Yeah. He was documenting the angles of the cliffs, the width of the river, the elevation of the hills.
And for over a century, his report just sat there, largely ignored.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But BattlefieldTravels.com translated this massive document into English, took Lecomte's 1890 hand-drawn sketches, and superimposed them over modern, real-world geographic information system data.
Okay, let me stop you there, because the phrase GIS analysis gets thrown around a lot. How exactly do you take a 135-year-old hand-drawn map and overlay it onto a modern satellite grid? I mean, things change, right?
They do, yeah. It requires looking past the vegetation and human development to find the geological anchors. You take digital elevation models, which map the exact slopes and altitudes of the terrain from space.
Okay.
And you look for the permanent features Lecomte drew, a specific hairpin bend in a river, or the precise angle where a sheer cliff meets a valley floor.
Right, the rock itself doesn't move.
Exactly. What Michael Prichter found was that Lecomte's sketches, which some historians might have dismissed as exaggerated colonial dramatizations, were geographically flawless.
That's incredible.
It is. By locking those old maps onto modern topographical grids, we can now see precisely how the microterrain dictated every single minute of this battle, literally down to the meter.
It's incredible historical detective work. But before we get to the cliffs and the gunfire, we really have to understand why a French military column marched blindly into a gorge in the first place.
Right.
We need to understand the piece of paper that put them there.
Yeah, we have to zoom out to the broader strategic context of the Tonkin campaign. So from roughly 1873 to 1884, France was aggressively expanding its colonial footprint into Tonkin, which is northern Vietnam.
And that region wasn't just isolated, right?
No, not at all. This area had traditionally been a client state of the Qing Empire in China. So the Qing court in Beijing was watching this European military intrusion right on their southern border with intense, escalating alarm.
And they weren't just sitting in Beijing writing angry diplomatic cables. They were actively funneling money, weapons, and men into the resistance.
Exactly. The French were not fighting a disorganized militia. They were facing a sophisticated, multi-layered coalition. They fought local Vietnamese forces. They fought the notorious Black Flag Army.
Which was basically a mercenary group, right?
Yeah, essentially a massive, highly organized mercenary syndicate led by a brilliant tactician named Liu Yongfu. And increasingly, they were fighting covertly deployed, regular Chinese troops from the Guangxi army.
But despite facing this huge coalition, by early 1884, the French military machine was simply grinding out victories.
They were on a roll.
Yeah, they had secured the Red River Delta. In December 1883, at the capture of Sun Tay, a French force of roughly 9,000 defeated a combined enemy force of 12,000.
Massive numbers.
And then, in March 1884, they routed the Chinese Guangxi army at their massive fortified stronghold of Bac Ninh.
And those victories created a profound sense of momentum. The French high command felt invincible. They had shattered the strongest fortresses the coalition had to offer, which naturally brings the diplomats to the table.
Right, because the Chinese realized they're losing ground.
Exactly. So on May 11, 1884, representatives from France and China signed the Treaty of Tientsin.
Let's tear into this treaty because it's the catalyst for the entire disaster. On the surface, it looks like a complete capitulation by the Chinese.
On paper, it is a masterstroke of French diplomacy. The treaty explicitly stipulates the immediate evacuation of all Chinese military forces from Tonkin back across the Chinese border.
Immediate evacuation.
Yes. It
Yeah.
doesn't just say eventually.
Yeah.
It gives a highly specific time frame of 20 to 40 days. Furthermore, it grants French recognition of the border, establishes lucrative free trade agreements, and essentially cements the French protectorate over Tonkin.
So here is the glaring question. If the ink is dry on a peace treaty signed by the highest diplomats of both empires, how does a massive multi-day firefight break out just a month later? Are we looking at a classic communication failure where, the messenger's horse threw a shoe and the word simply didn't reach the front lines in time?
It was not a communication failure. No. It was intentional deceit, but we have to be careful about who we assign that deceit to. The Qing court in Beijing was not a single, unified monolith.
Like any government, really.
Right. While the official diplomats negotiated and signed the treaty, there was a deeply entrenched, highly influential faction within the court known as the War faction.
Led by Zhang Zhidong.
Exactly. Zhang Zhidong was a powerful, hawkish figure. His faction viewed the Treaty of Tientsin as a humiliating capitulation to a foreign power. They fundamentally believed that France was overextended, fighting a colonial war far from home, and that China possessed the manpower and the geographic advantage to bleed them dry.
So Zhang Zhidong and the war faction just ignore the treaty.
Worse than ignore it, they actively weaponize it.
Wow.
Yeah. While the diplomats in Paris and Beijing treated the treaty as binding international law, the war faction used the negotiations as a smokescreen. They saw the 20 to 40-day withdrawal window as a massive operational stall tactic.
Ooh, we see.
They used that time not to pack up and leave, but to quietly shift the actual military reality on the ground. They funneled fresh troops, ammunition, and supplies into the border regions. They never intended to withdraw a single soldier.
Which creates a lethal disconnect. The French high command, sitting in Hanoi, looks at the treaty and assumes the ground truth is that the Chinese are walking away. They believe they're about to march into a massive power vacuum.
And nature, especially political nature, abhors a vacuum. General Milhaud, the French commander-in-chief of the Expeditionary Corps, knew that if the regular Chinese forces retreated, local warlords, bandits, and remnants of the Black Flags would immediately swarm in.
Right, to seize the key border posts and taxation routes.
Exactly. His objective was clear. Assemble a flying column, advance rapidly, and physically occupy locations like Lang Son, That Cay, and Cao Bang before anyone else could.
But the intelligence they used to plan this rapid advance was, bordering on military negligence.
It really was. To map out a 100-kilometer march into hostile, completely uncharted jungle territory, French intelligence relied primarily on a crudely constructed Annamite map they had literally captured from the enemy Black Flags during a previous battle.
Wait, they're planning a strategic occupation based on a captured enemy sketch. That's like a Roman legion trying to plan an invasion of Germania based on a doodle they found in a barbarian's tent.
It gets worse.
How does it get worse?
Beyond the captured map, they relied heavily on the personal notes of two civilian travelers who had made the journey years prior.
Civilian travelers.
Yeah. One was a French diplomat named Omot, and the other was a Spanish missionary, Father Luentes. Based on the travel diaries of a priest and a diplomat, the French high command calculated that they could march a massive, heavily armed military column 100 kilometers to Lang Son in exactly 5 days.
The arrogance of that assumption is staggering. I mean, a single traveler with a local guide slipping quietly through the jungle is operating in a completely different physical reality than a military formation. Moving an army isn't hiking. It's dragging a small city across hostile terrain.
The friction of war is magnified exponentially by the logistics. You have to feed the men, water the animals, carry the ammunition, build the bridges, and clear the roads.
Yeah.
Every single mile fought through the jungle takes hours of physical labor before a boot even hits the mud.
Let's break down the actual composition of this column, because Lieutenant Colonel Alphonse Dugenne's force was incredibly complex. We're talking about 965 military personnel, supported by 900 local porters, who were commonly referred to at the time as coolies.
That ratio alone tells you a terrifying story about the logistical friction of this environment. It's nearly a 1-to-1 ratio of combatants to non-combatants.
Which is wild.
You need a civilian porter just to carry the food, the water, and the canvas tents for the soldier who was holding the rifle. The logistical tail is just as massive as the teeth.
And the military teeth are a fascinating cross-section of French colonial power. You have a battalion of the 3rd Regiment of Marine Infantry, who are your hardened, disciplined, veteran colonial shock troops. But right alongside them, you have the 1st Battalion of Tonkinese Auxiliaries.
It is crucial to highlight the Tonkinese Auxiliaries. These were local Vietnamese recruits who had been given uniforms, rifles, and only a few weeks of basic military training.
So they're completely green.
Entirely raw, and yet due to the nature of the column, these barely trained men are about to be thrust into the vanguard of a complex expedition.
You also have a half squadron of chasseurs d'Afrique, which is light cavalry mounted on horses. You have a company of the 2nd Battalion of African Light Infantry, which is actually a penal infantry unit.
The penal company is a brutal reality of the colonial military system.
Yeah, explain that a bit.
These were soldiers undergoing severe disciplinary punishment, often assigned to the absolute hardest, most physically destructive labor and the most dangerous rearguard fighting. They're tough, but they're operating under extreme duress.
You also have a section of engineers and pontoon builders and an optical telegraphy section.
That optical telegraphy section is their only umbilical cord to the outside world. This is 1884. They do not have portable radios.
Right, obviously.
To communicate with headquarters in Hanoi, they rely on a system of signal lamps. At night, an officer has to climb to the highest, most exposed hilltop, light a specialized lamp, and physically flash Morse code messages across the horizon to the next relay station.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It requires clear weather, a direct line of sight, and an immense amount of bravery from the operator.
But there is one glaring omission from this order of battle. One fateful choice that Dugenne makes before they even step off the assembly line. He is offered a battery of 4 artillery pieces, but he leaves them behind.
It comes down to draft animals, or rather the severe lack of them. A 19th century field gun is a massive piece of iron and bronze. You don't just roll it through the jungle.
No, definitely not.
You need teams of specialized, strong horses to haul the guns and separate teams of mules to haul the immensely heavy ammunition limbers. Dugenne looked at the muddy tracks, looked at his lack of animals, and made a calculated commander's risk.
He traded firepower for speed.
Exactly. He genuinely believed the civilian travel diaries. He believed the Treaty of Tientsin. He thought they were embarking on an administrative walk in the park.
A walk in the park that begins at 03:30 hours on June 13th. The column steps off. But almost immediately, the physical environment of Tonkin begins systematically dismantling their 5-day timeline.
The initial stage of their march is routed along what was called the Mandarin Road. Calling it a road is an extreme generosity.
Right.
It was, at best, an unpaved dirt track, about 8 meters wide, winding its way through flat, heavily cultivated rice paddies.
And they are marching straight into the teeth of the rainy season. The monsoon rains do not care about a French general's timetable. On June 14th, a severe storm hits.
Imagine the physical mechanics of that. You have almost 2,000 men, plus horses, plus hundreds of heavily laden mules, all funneling down an 8-meter dirt track.
It's a traffic jam.
A muddy one. When the monsoon hits, the sheer volume of water instantly turns the dirt into a viscous slurry. The hooves and the boots churn that slurry into a deep, sucking quagmire. Men are sinking to their calves, mules are getting stuck. The physical caloric expenditure just to take single step doubles, then triples.
And then the topography throws up a wall. By June 16th, they reach a river just north of a place called Ka Sun. The river is swollen from the rains. The engineering section spends an agonizing, back-breaking day felling trees, lashing timber, and building a pontoon bridge across the water.
A massive effort.
Huge. But that night, another wave of torrential monsoon rains hits the mountains upstream. By the next morning, their newly constructed bridge is completely submerged under nearly a meter of fast-flowing, violent floodwater.
Yeah.
So what does a commander do? You have 2,000 souls and an entire supply train staring at a flooded river. How do they actually cross?
Painfully and incredibly slowly. It becomes a manual ferrying operation.
Yeah.
The cavalry horses and the transport oxen literally have to be forced into the floodwaters to swim across, fighting the current the whole way.
And you can't swim a mule that is strapped down with heavy crates of ammunition or bags of rice.
Exactly. You have to halt the column, unpack the mule, carry the supplies down to the muddy bank, load the supplies onto small local junk boats they manage to commandeer.
Oh, man.
Right. Row the heavy boats across the surging river, then force the terrified, exhausted mule into the water to swim across. Once the mule reaches the far bank, dripping wet and shivering, you have to repack the crates and the bags back onto the animal, and you have to do this hundreds of times.
The friction is astronomical. Because of this flooding, over the course of June 17th, 18, and 19, the entire column advanced a grand total of 3 kilometers.
It's hard to even fathom.
Let me repeat that for you. 3 kilometers in 3 days. The 5-day timeline to reach Lang Son evaporated the moment the first raindrop fell.
And while the mud and the rivers are physically exhausting the column, there's an invisible, creeping enemy that begins to exhaust them psychologically. As they push past the village of Ka Sun, the macro terrain radically shifts. They transition out of the flat, open rice paddies and enter a suffocatingly narrow jungle defile.
A defile is basically a narrow pass or gorge, and Lecomte's reports note that the road suddenly shrinks from 8 meters wide to just 1.5 meters wide.
For a military commander, a 1.5-meter path in a jungle is a nightmare scenario. Your entire force of 2,000 men and animals is suddenly strung out in a single-file line that stretches for miles.
You're completely stuck.
You have zero lateral mobility. If you're attacked from the front or the rear, the units in the middle cannot physically maneuver to help. You're entirely dictated by the constraints of the terrain.
And the signs that they're walking into danger are becoming impossible to ignore. Capitaine Lecomte is pushing ahead with the reconnaissance cavalry. He finds that the villages along the route are completely empty. The cooking fires are cold, the fields are abandoned.
But the jungle surrounding them is not silent. Through the thick canopy, the French troops begin to hear the rhythmic, distant echoing of gongs. Warning shots. Single rifle cracks are being fired high into the air ahead of them, signaling from hilltop to hilltop that the European column is advancing.
That must have been terrifying.
The psychological pressure is immense. You know you're being watched, but you cannot see a single enemy soldier.
And it quickly escalates from warning shots to actual violence. Just past Ka Sun, Lecomte's reconnaissance party is ambushed. It's a brief skirmish, but the hostility is undeniable. A cavalry lieutenant's horse is shot and killed right out from under him, and Capitaine Lecomte himself takes a minor wound to the face from a bullet fragment or splinter. The assumption of a peaceful, administrative occupation is dead.
This is where that fragile optical telegraph lifeline proves its worth. Every night, Lieutenant Bailey takes his squad, climbs out of the suffocating valley up to the exposed hilltops, and uses his signal lamps to flash Morse code back toward Hanoi.
What's he saying?
He's desperately tapping out messages warning General Millet that the treaty is failing and they're encountering armed, organized resistance.
So we have a column that is physically battered by the monsoon, exhausted by the mud, and psychologically frayed by unseen snipers. Finally, on the afternoon of June 22, they reach the banks of the Song Throng River.
Right.
And what they find occupying the high ground on the far side is not a token retreating garrison. It is a massive, heavily armed force of regular Chinese troops.
The geometry of this specific location is a masterclass in how micro-terrain dictates a battlefield. As the French vanguard approaches the only viable fording point of the river, they are squeezed into a natural, inescapable bottleneck.
Describe the mechanics of this choke point, because if you look at the GIS maps from battlefieldtravels.com, it feels almost claustrophobic.
Imagine you're an infantryman walking point. Immediately to your right is the deep, fast-flowing Songthong River. You cannot deploy your troops to the right. Towering over you, immediately to your left, is the Nui Dong Nai mountain range.
And these aren't small hills.
No, these aren't gentle rolling hills. The GIS models confirm Lecomte's sketches. These are sheer, vertical rock cliffs rising over 100 meters straight up into the canopy.
So you have a swollen river on one side, a sheer vertical cliff wall on the other, and directly in front of you, across the river ford you have to cross, are hundreds of Chinese rifles pointed at you.
It is the ultimate tactical trap. At 05:45 hours on the morning of June 23, Colonel Dugenne orders an advance guard consisting of the raw Tonkinese riflemen and a veteran Marine company to push across the fording point. The moment their boots hit the far bank, they receive sustained rifle fire from a heavily wooded hillock about 250 meters away.
Here's where the narrative gets incredibly tense and where I have to push back on Dugenne's mindset. His troops are taking fire from a fortified position. They are stuck in a gorge, but Dugenne explicitly orders his men not to return fire immediately.
Yeah.
Isn't that tactical suicide? How does a commander justify ordering his men to stand in a kill zone and not shoot back?
It highlights the agonizing, almost impossible burden of command in a colonial setting. Dugenne is a professional soldier, but he is operating under strict, inflexible political orders from Paris and Hanoi.
Ah, the treaty.
Exactly. He's been told that the Treaty of Tientsin is in effect. If he orders a full-scale assault, and it turns out this is just a localized misunderstanding by a rogue Chinese commander who didn't get the memo, Dugenne could be court-martialed for unilaterally restarting a war between two empires.
Wow, that's a terrible position to be in.
He's desperately trying to give diplomacy a chance to work, even while bullets are flying.
But he doesn't just let his men stand there like targets. He relies on strict mechanical military drills.
Exactly. He utilizes the discipline of the Marine infantry to survive without escalating. Detachments cross the river and methodically deploy into skirmish lines to the left and right. They are covered by the penal troops, the African light infantry, who set up a base of fire on the near bank.
Okay.
They advance using discipline-bounding movements, clearing the thicket step by step without resorting to a chaotic general volley.
And the fire they're taking isn't from terrified, untrained peasants. Lieutenant Vernet's platoon pushes into the brush and is met with disciplined, coordinated, massed volleys of rifle fire. The French instantly realize they are not fighting local bandits. They are fighting the highly trained, regular Guangxi army.
But then, right as the skirmish threatens to boil over into a full-scale battle, the bizarre theater of 19th century diplomacy violently reinserts itself. At 0900 hours, the Chinese gunfire mysteriously ceases.
Just
stops. Out of the dense jungle, 3 Chinese civilian dignitaries simply walk down the trail, approaching the French outposts under a flag of truce.
They're carrying diplomatic letters. The dignitaries claim to be emissaries of the Viceroy of Guangxi. They approach Dugenne and essentially say, "We are fully aware of the Treaty of Tientsin. The Emperor desires peace. We are entirely willing to evacuate, but we simply need more time to withdraw our troops. The bureaucracy is slow, and we need instructions from Beijing."
And while this high-level negotiation is happening in the command tent, an incredibly surreal, almost cinematic scene unfolds on the tactical front lines.
Oh, this part is wild.
The French Marines and the regular Chinese troopsmen, who were literally trying to kill each other 20 minutes prior, step out of cover, they lower their rifles, they walk up to the invisible boundary line between their outposts, and they begin fraternizing.
Unbelievable.
They're standing in a jungle gorge, exchanging cigarettes and tobacco, communicating in whatever broken language they can manage.
It is mind-bending. But put yourself in Dugenne's boots. The clock is ticking. He has absolute orders from his general to march forward and occupy the territory. But standing in his path is a massive, entrenched military force claiming a bureaucratic delay. How does he weigh the geopolitical weight of a signed treaty against the brutal reality of his entire column sitting exposed in a natural choke point?
It is the absolute loneliness of command. He's trapped in a paradox. If he attacks, he ruins the peace. If he waits, he grants the Chinese war faction the exact thing they want.
The stall tactic.
Every hour he sits in that defile negotiating, the Chinese are moving troops onto the cliffs above him. They're fortifying the high ground. He's slowly allowing his vulnerable, strung-out column to be surrounded.
Dugenne tries to thread the needle. He demands that the Chinese emissaries use their authority to order the troops to dismantle their barricades and retreat immediately. The emissaries nod, smile, and say they will relay the message. But hours tick by. Nothing happens. The Chinese troops do not move.
Right.
By 1500 hours, Dugenne realizes the stall tactic for what it is. He cannot leave his men sitting in a kill zone overnight. He issues a final, uncompromising ultimatum to the Chinese general. In 1 hour, the French troops will continue their march.
He's calling their bluff. He's gambling that the threat of a disciplined, fully armed French advance will compel the Chinese commander to finally honor the treaty and pull his forces back without further bloodshed.
But instead, he steps directly into the jaws of Zhang Zedong's trap. At 1600 hours, exactly 1 hour later, Dugenne orders the column to recommence the march. The vanguard, led by the cavalry, pushes up the narrow trail.
And this is where the physical geography seals their fate. As the cavalry vanguard advances, they pass a specific terrain feature that Lecomte mapped meticulously. It's a reentrant. Now, a reentrant is essentially a deep indentation, a fold or a small gorge cut directly into the face of the sheer Nui Dong Nai cliff. It creates a natural amphitheater of rock.
The moment the French ride into the mouth of that reentrant, the ambush is triggered. Chinese troops, who had used the hours of diplomacy to quietly occupy 3 massive hidden fortifications built directly into the cliff face, suddenly open fire.
The volume of fire is devastating. At that close range, multiple cavalrymen are hit instantly. Horses are screaming, thrashing in the mud, blocking the narrow trail for the infantry behind them.
Dugenne, hearing the gunfire, still desperately clings to the hope that this is a localized mistake, that some nervous Chinese sentry fired without orders. He screams for his buglers to sound the ceasefire. He is trying to broadcast a de-escalation signal across the battlefield.
But the response he receives destroys any illusion of peace. From the high, fog-shrouded peaks of the Nui Dong Nai, Chinese bugles begin to blow in unison. And they aren't echoing the ceasefire, they are sounding a coordinated attack signal.
It's a meticulously planned orchestration. The moment those Chinese bugles echo through the valley, an overwhelming volume of rifle fire erupts from positions totally hidden in the dense bushes to the front of the French column and plunging down from the cliffs on their left and sweeping across the river on their right.
The Dugenne column is instantly engaged from 3 sides, front, left, and right. They are trapped in a 1.5-meter-wide defile, massively outnumbered, and taking fire from elevated, fortified, invisible positions. This is the exact scenario where armies panic, rout, and are slaughtered.
But they don't break. And this is where the modern GIS analysis by BattleFieldTravels.com highlights Dugenne's brilliant, almost instinctual use of microterrain to save his men.
Consider the physics of plunging fire. If a sniper is shooting at you from 100 meters straight up a cliff, hiding behind a rock or a tree trunk on the ground offers 0 geometrical protection. The bullet goes right over the cover.
Right.
The French vanguard is caught in the open, taking this plunging fire from the cliff forts. Instead of retreating back down the road, which would have exposed them to a crossfire, Dugenne orders them to rush forward directly toward the cliffs.
They find dead space.
Precisely. They rush to the very base of the sheer cliffs and shelter among massive boulders that had crumbled from the rock face over centuries. By pressing their backs directly against the vertical stone wall, they enter the dead space.
Because of the angle.
Exactly. The Chinese troops in the forts above them cannot physically depress the muzzles of their rifles low enough over the edge of the cliff to shoot the French below. Dugenne used the enemy's own vertical elevation against them.
That saves the vanguard, but Dugenne still has a catastrophic problem. His column is fundamentally broken. It's spread out over miles of jungle track. You have the vanguard pinned against the cliff face, the main guard trapped hundreds of meters back in a small clearing, and the massive, highly vulnerable baggage train of unarmed porters further back still, completely exposed to flanking fire.
If he leaves them isolated, the Chinese will descend from the hills and butcher them piecemeal. Under heavy, continuous fire, Dugenne has to orchestrate a complex, fighting retraction. By 1900 hours, as the tropical dusk is rapidly falling, he manages to pull his vanguard back from the cliffs, pull his main guard back, and consolidate everyone into the small clearing occupied by the baggage train.
They're dragging their dead and bleeding wounded through the mud with them. Once consolidated, they don't just huddle together, they dig in. They form a massive defensive infantry square, roughly 150 meters on each side.
The infantry square is a classic, deeply ingrained European defensive formation. It ensures that no matter where the enemy attacks from the jungle, they are met with an unbroken wall of outward-facing rifle barrels. The engineers and infantry frantically use their entrenching tools to dig shallow trenches in the mud, trying to create whatever lip of earth they can to protect against the plunging fire that's still raining down from the high ground.
But Dugenne knows the darkness is dangerous. He knows the Chinese will use the pitch black of the jungle canopy to creep up to the very edge of the square and throw grenades or mass for a bayonet charge. So he establishes warning piquets.
He pushes small 10-man teams out of the relative safety of the square, setting them 60 meters deep into the black jungle. These piquets act as a human tripwire. Their terrifying job is to sit in the mud in total darkness, listen for the sound of snapping twigs, fire a volley at any approaching assault force, and then run like hell back to the square before they're overrun.
It's a night of absolute psychological terror. June 23 closes with 8 French soldiers confirmed killed and 46 severely wounded. And in the middle of this pitch-black siege, Dugenne makes a desperate play. He takes Lieutenant Bailey, the telegraph officer, and orders him to slip out of the square, sneak alone through the jungle, past the encircling Chinese lines, get back to the village of Bắc Lệ miles to the rear, set up his lamp, and tap out an emergency SOS optical message to headquarters in Hanoi.
It is an incredible leap of faith. Dugenne has no idea if Bailey will be captured and beheaded in the dark, or if a relief force even exists, let alone if it can march fast enough to reach them before they run out of ammunition.
Dawn finally breaks on the morning of June 24th, and the tropical sunlight reveals the true, horrific scale of the trap they've walked into.
At 0600 hours, French skirmishers managed to capture and interrogate a few Chinese soldiers they describe as deserters. The intelligence they beat out of these men is paralyzing. Dugenne takes a head count. He has roughly 750 combat-effective, uninjured men left capable of holding a rifle. The deserters reveal that the hills surrounding the square are occupied by approximately 8,000 regular Chinese troops of the Guangxi army.
They are outnumbered more than 10 to 1.
And the tactical nightmare is still dictated entirely by those Nui Dan Nai cliffs. Under the cover of night, hundreds of Chinese snipers have scaled the sheer rock faces. They've tied themselves to ledges and wedged themselves into crevices hundreds of feet in the air.
That's terrifying.
As the sun comes up, they have a completely unobstructed bird's-eye view directly down into the interior of the French square.
The plunging fire resumes with devastating accuracy. The trenches the French dug offer cover from bullets coming horizontally out of the jungle, but they offer zero physical protection from lead raining straight down from the sky. The French infantry are taking casualties inside the square, and they can't even spot the muzzle flashes high on the rock walls to return fire.
Adding to the panic, the advanced piquets in the jungle start reporting that massive columns of Chinese infantry have bypassed the square entirely. They've infiltrated through the dense brush and physically cut off the Mandarin Road behind the French.
So they're cut off?
Completely. The only route back to the river and to safety is blocked. The encirclement is absolute.
They're bleeding out, they are surrounded, and their ammunition reserves are dwindling fast. At 1100 hours, Dugenne makes the hardest, most necessary call a commander can make. To stay in the square is to die a slow, inevitable death by sniper fire. He orders a retrograde movement, a full-scale fighting retreat back down the road through the enemy-blocking forest to the river ford and the village of Bắc Lệ.
Now we need to pause and analyze the sheer difficulty of what he is ordering. A retrograde operation under heavy enemy pressure is arguably the single most complex and dangerous military maneuver to execute.
Right.
The natural, overwhelming human instinct when you are being shot at is to turn your back and run away as fast as your legs will carry you.
And if a military formation does that, if they break into a mob and run, it turns into a slaughter. The enemy cavalry just rides them down. If you look at military history, successfully executing a fighting retreat against overwhelming odds is the stuff of legend. It's Xenophon's 10,000 Greek mercenaries fighting their way out of the heart of the Persian Empire. It's the nightmare scenario of a Roman legion desperately trying to fight its way out of an ambush in a dense Germanic forest.
To prevent a rout, Dugenne structures his retreating column with meticulous mechanical precision. He assigns the vanguard, made up of a veteran Marine company, the combat engineers, and the remaining Tonkinese infantry, the brutal task of acting as a battering ram. Their job is to punch a physical hole through the Chinese lines, blocking the road ahead.
The main body is positioned in the center, and they have one sole, sacred responsibility: protecting the most vulnerable element of the entire force, the wounded. Men who cannot walk are strapped to the sides of terrified mules or carried in blood-soaked canvas ambulance stretchers.
And the absolute hardest, most psychologically devastating job goes to the African Light Infantry, the Penal Company. They are ordered to form the rear guard.
Oh, man.
They have to walk backward. They must face the pursuing mass of the Chinese army, lay down a wall of fire to hold them back, break contact, fall back 50 meters, establish a new firing line, and repeat the process over and over, all while taking continuous casualties. It's a grueling, exhausting echelon withdrawal.
But right as they begin this incredibly disciplined, precarious maneuver, tragedy strikes the weakest link in the chain, the supply train. As they are packing up to move, a massive, coordinated Chinese volley crashes out of the jungle directly into the huddled mass of local porters. 10 civilian coolies are killed instantly, dropping into the mud.
And the psychological breaking point is violently reached. You have to understand the mindset of these remaining 890 porters. They're not soldiers. They are unarmed civilians, conscripted for labor, caught in the middle of a terrifying, deafening war zone.
Yeah, you can't blame them.
When that volley hits, the panic is contagious and absolute. They drop the ammunition crates, they drop the rice sacks, they drop the water barrels, and they flee blindly in sheer terror down the road toward Bắc Lệ.
The logistics umbilical cord is entirely severed. Without the porters, the French infantry cannot physically move their food, their water, or their heavy canvas tents. They are forced to make a brutal choice. They abandon almost everything to the advancing Chinese forces. They march out of the square carrying only their rifles, whatever ammunition they can stuff into their pockets, and they're bleeding wounded.
But despite the chaos of the fleeing porters, the strict defensive drills of the French infantry hold the line. The Marine companies execute textbook-bounding overwatch. One unit drops to a knee and lays down a deafening base of suppressive rifle fire into the jungle, while the unit next to them sprints backward down the trail. Then the retreating unit stops, turns, fires, and the first unit falls back behind them.
Leapfrogging.
They leapfrog backward. They are running a gauntlet of continuous crossfire the entire agonizing way back to the fording point of the Song Thuong River.
And when they finally hit the riverbank, they don't just break ranks and dive into the water to save themselves. The discipline holds. The Marines and the African Light Infantry pivot outward. They form a tight, heavily armed perimeter on the near bank. They hold the crossing open by sheer force of firepower, while the engineers drag the mules carrying the screaming wounded into the fast-flowing water.
It is a profound testament to Dugenne's command presence under fire. He has not crossed the river first to direct from safety. He stands in the mud on the enemy bank, under continuous sniper fire, physically directing the crossing. He counts the stretchers. He ensures that every single living, wounded man is transported over the water. Colonel Dugenne is the very last man of the column to step into the river and cross.
The Chinese forces, perhaps satisfied with capturing the massive, lucrative, abandoned supply train filled with French rifles and silver, or perhaps bloodied themselves by the disciplined rearguard, choose not to pursue them across the water. The battered, bleeding, exhausted column limps up the road and finally reaches the village of Bắc Lệ. But the shockwaves of this ambush are just beginning to ripple across the globe.
They don't stay in the village, though. Dugenne knows the village is indefensible. He immediately moves his exhausted, starving men onto a steep-sided, easily defensible hill near Bắc Lệ. They pull out their entrenching tools and they dig in for a second time.
The butcher's bill for the last 48 hours is incredibly grim. After 2 days of close-quarters jungle combat, 94 French combat troops are dead or severely wounded. 60 of the civilian coolies are dead, lying in the mud near the Nui Dong Nai cliffs. 10 cavalry horses and 30 transport mules have been shot or drowned.
They hold that steep hill, rationing their remaining bullets, until June 27. Finally, a heavily reinforced relief column, commanded by General de Négrier, arrives from the rear. When General de Négrier rides into the camp and sees the state of Dugenne's men, they're filthy, covered in mud and dried blood. Their uniforms are tattered. Many have lost their boots and are entirely barefoot. Yet they've maintained their weapons and fought off an entire army. De Négrier is visibly moved.
I can imagine.
He dismounts, walks up to Dugenne, and actually asks permission to embrace him in front of the troops, telling the colonel that he has upheld the absolute honor of their arms.
The military respects the survival, but the political earthquake back home is absolutely massive. When Lieutenant Bay's optical telegraph messages finally reach the relay station in Hanoi, and those messages are cabled via undersea wire all the way to Paris, the French public and the parliament are outraged.
For months, the French government had been selling the Tonkin campaign to the public as a simple pacification mission. It was supposed to be a bloodless, easy colonial expansion guaranteed by the newly signed Treaty of Tientsin.
Yeah.
The sheer violence of the ambush at Bắc Lệ shatters that illusion instantly. The public feels betrayed. The press demands retribution for the dead Marines.
The ambush makes the Sino-French War entirely inevitable. The treaty is dead in the water. And what is endlessly fascinating is the stark contrast with how the Chinese leadership reacted to the battle.
Remember Zhang Zedong and that hawkish war faction we discussed? We actually have the captured internal Chinese correspondence and imperial decrees from the days immediately following the battle.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to hide the ambush or frame it as an unfortunate accident. The emperor and the powerful mandarins in Beijing were immensely proud of the carnage.
They weren't apologizing, they were handing out promotions and massive silver bounties to the generals involved.
Exactly. The captured imperial dispatches literally praised the ambush, stating, "Our soldiers showed themselves to be very strong and courageous. We must encourage our men so that they make every effort to defeat the enemy again." Unquote. This correspondence is the smoking gun. It proves decisively that this was a deliberate, planned, offensive military operation designed by the war faction. Furthermore, French intelligence later confirmed that 3,000 fresh, highly trained regular Chinese troops had arrived at the garrison of Tanmoy just days before the ambush. This was never a disorganized, retreating garrison caught by surprise. It was a massive, heavy hammer waiting patiently for the French anvil to arrive.
So if we look back at the overarching tactical assessment of this entire disaster, the central glaring question remains. How did a force outnumbered 5-1, dragging a massive panicked baggage train, survive a multi-pronged ambush in completely unknown, incredibly hostile terrain?
It comes down entirely to Colonel Dugenne's absolute rigid adherence to fundamental military doctrine. Even when his superiors told him he was on a peaceful march, even when he was forced to negotiate and watch his men exchange cigarettes with diplomats, he never let his tactical guard down. He maintained his vanguard, he maintained flank security, he utilized bounding overwatch during the retreat. He did not let the bureaucratic illusion of peace erode his violent tactical discipline.
And it all comes circling back to that vital concept of micro-terrain.
Yes, the micro-terrain was both the fatal trap and the ultimate salvation. The Chinese commanders used the macro-terrain, the narrow defile, the towering cliffs, to spring a textbook ambush. But Dugenne's immediate eye for small-scale terrain features saved his men from annihilation.
Right.
He recognized the dead space beneath the cliffs and used it to shield his vanguard from plunging fire. He used the steep banks of the river as an anchor point to secure his flank during the desperate retreat. He didn't fight against the physical reality of the terrain. He adapted his formations to it instantaneously under extreme lethal pressure.
It was a masterclass in survival that earned them the highest official praise. General Millet, the commander-in-chief sitting back in Hanoi, issued a formal order of the day to the entire Expeditionary Corps that essentially stated, "You were attacked by a disloyal enemy who prepared everything to lure you into a trap. You fought successfully 1 against 10. You are worth the legendary soldiers of the First Republic."
It is a remarkable historic acknowledgement of a strategic defeat that was celebrated as a tactical victory simply because the men possessed the discipline to survive it.
But the thought I want to leave you with today, as we wrap up our analysis of this ambush, is about how the intentional erasure of history shapes the modern landscapes we walk through. Today, if you travel to Vietnam, this massive battle is not taught in local schools. A brutal war fought on Vietnamese soil between a former European colonial power and Vietnam's massive northern neighbor, China, is considered far too politically sensitive to be officially remembered or memorialized by the current government. There are no bronze plaques on the trees. There are no museums at the site of the square.
The intense political complexities of the present day have literally erased the violence of the past from the public consciousness.
Yet if you go and stand exactly where Michael Prichter stood when he conducted his research in April 2025, the landscape refuses to forget. The sheer, towering rock cliffs of the Nui Dong Nai still stand exactly as they did when the bugles blew in 1884. The Song Thuong River still flows exactly where the French engineers desperately swam their bleeding mules. The physical landscape itself is the only silent witness left to a forgotten clash in the jungle that fundamentally changed the course of empires.
It is a powerful, sobering reminder that history is always permanently inscribed in the terrain, even if a government chooses to erase it from the textbooks. We must look to the geography to find the truth.
And if you want to see that exact geography for yourself to truly understand the spatial reality of this battle, you must go to battlefieldtravels.com. That is the essential core source for this entire study. On their site, you can access Michael Prichter's full interactive GIS terrain analysis. You can explore the incredible translated maps originally drawn by Capitaine Lecomte under fire. You can dive deeper into the overarching Tonkin campaign, and you can explore hundreds of other meticulously researched battles and campaigns. It is an absolutely incredible resource for anyone who wants to understand how terrain dictates history.